No lower voice this time. Deal with it. I wanted to work on that culture I made in the previous video because I had an idea for some plants that would exist in their little perfect oasis. Introducing the apostle tree, which yes, I did forget to draw via the time-lapse function, but there it is. It's very similar to like savanna trees you'd see in like in arid landscapes and deserts. I didn't feel like breaking that kind of trend of trees that look like that, so I just went with a good old arid looking tree. This tree makes little orbs of sap that leak out of the junction points, or like the sharp angles of like the main branchy structure of the tree. Made example of the sap being fresh and hardened or aged, but for the purposes of the people living in the oasis, it doesn't really matter if it's dried or fresh, though I assume it would probably be much easier to store and move around if it was a little aged so it's not sticking everywhere. And so let's just keep the apostle tree in our brain for a little bit while we move on to the star of the plants here, the terror bloom. Terror bloom is a very rare plant that has a potent poison within its plant fibers. The flower was few in number when the people of the oasis first kind of arrived there, but through careful cultivation, they've made it to a more reliable source for its valuable components. Terror bloom grows 3 or 4 pearl-like seeds that form at the base of the petals. These seeds are harvested for the oil that they contain, and a minimum of 1 seed is kept per plant and put aside so that each plant can be replaced because they obviously don't want to run out. The oil that is extracted from the seeds and that is also stored in the thorns of the plant, and mainly in like the stem, most of the thorns are there, is a poison that slowly dulls your senses. It's kind of acting like a fog between your senses and your brain, so you can still think and are conscious, but the signals that reach your senses don't really connect, and so you can't really communicate with them. A small amount of this poison could make your fingers tingle, your sight hazy, have a bit of a lack of taste, or trouble hearing, but larger or more concentrated amounts could basically shut off your senses, and this is why they called it terror oil. Same thing with terror bloom, is that it does that to you. It basically leaves you in a state of paralysis while your brain is active, but you can't communicate with the outside world in any way. And they get these oils from the seeds by crushing and squeezing them under these large, like heavy stone kind of grinder mechanisms that are just simple pull through the center, push it, slowly grinds up the oil, and then it is secured in secure like wooden containers. I haven't thought too much about the containers, but that's not that important. This community uses the terror oil for a few main purposes, the first being how they make a durable thread-like material for sewing their clothes together. In the previous video I talked about how they make a lot of clothes and jewelry and such, and so for these clothes they need a thread. And what they do is that they add a large amount of the apostle tree sap to a cooking pot, bringing it to kind of like a low boil, and they add a small bit of a concentrated terror oil. And this mixture, the compounds of the oil and the sap, I have it, is just that they kind of connect better, and so a bit of the oil helps make the sap more durable in the end product. And the colors kind of mix together and make more of a bright red, mixing with like the amber sap and like the pink kind of violet oil. So yeah, the sap kind of turns red, and it's a bit more like sludgy as it's all boiling in the pot. And then to make the threads, they let it cool down a little bit, still kind of hot, but cool down a little bit. And then they dip wooden spikes into the mixture and they hung it up on lines of rope. They'd basically be like tens of lines of these just like strung up somewhere. There'd probably be like a dedicated spot in their oasis for this. And then the sap slowly drizzles down into these long thin threads, that's the word, of sap that harden, and then they take all these long threads, bundle them together, but they kind of roll them around in a stone or sand-like dust to prevent the naturally tacky texture from like sticking together or being hard to work with. And then, of course, finally, the threads are wound up into large spools that are then used for sewing clothes and fabrics, daily use stuff. Side note, the cooking process does remove some of the poison's effect. I don't want to say all of it. I kind of like the idea that someone could like boil down the threads and still get a poison out of it in like some sort of desperate scenario, but it's not too important. The terror oil was first used for the threads and that whole process, but as time went on, for some of these other purposes, not too much time, but it became somewhat of a catch-all kind of resource. They figured shortly later that they could use the oil to poison animals and basically like reduce the animal's senses so that they can kind of kill it in more of a humane, merciful way. The people of the community are mostly kind of like vegan, vegetarian, but I kind of, just in case, sometimes if they need to hunt for some reason or another, they would use the terror oil to prevent it from feeling pain and have it. I could feel they'd probably like pray for the animal afterwards too. I didn't think about that, but that kind of just came to mind. In theory, this oil could also be used in combat when fighting enemies. As like, this would probably not happen, but like if they needed to defend from some sort of threat or opponent, a concentrated amount of this oil could basically completely shut down the opponent's senses and would end the battle pretty much instantly. I also, talking with a friend of mine, he gave me the idea is that with that as well, they could use this oil, maybe make some sort of ointment with it, and they could use it to numb someone's senses while they're performing like a medical practice or a surgery. So like sewing up a wound, I don't know if they'd sew it up with the terror oil threads. That's probably not a good idea. But then again, in small amounts, it basically helped the stitches not feel pain later as it heals. So actually that might be a good idea. And it's sap, so it's also like biodegradable. This isn't in the script. I'm spitballing now. uh, and then the other idea I had for this, the final one so far, kind of, is that warriors and the protectors that live in this community could also use the ointment as almost like a training method. They might be able to gain somewhat of a resistance to it, but the better purpose of this would be to learn and practice functioning and keeping their body moving while it like under an impairment, so they could learn to like wield a blade while their hands are numb. They could have their senses dulled, like applying a bit of ointment to their ears or under their eye, and practice basically combat maneuvers and general practice while they have to rely on only partial amounts of their senses. Another side note is just that people who like the people who cultivate the plant would have a continuous or probably permanent loss of feeling in their hands, just from like the prolonged contact with the plant. It'd probably be like an over the years thing, because the plant it's not like slicked with the poison. It's like you have to get cut on it. So I just assume that's like after years of handling the plant, eventually you'd have like permanent tingling in your fingers or even full loss of touch in like your hands. And then, oh, finally, actually, the petals, they have very little amounts of poison. So the poison's not really present there. So they're able to grind those up and turn it into kind of like a purple dye that they can use to change the color of their clothes and fabrics. That is something I do still need to work on, is a way for this community of people to get their fabrics. I haven't fully thought this part out. I know I need it to be a way that doesn't kind of interrupt the thread making process, because if it does, then the sap threads have not much purpose. So I was probably going to make it like a thick fur from like a local animal within the oasis. But then again, like if it's in an oasis in a desert, the fur wouldn't like be that thick because the animal wouldn't really develop that way. And then also it wouldn't really be a good idea to wear thick furred fabrics while living in a desert. That doesn't really make sense. So that's still a part I need to work on. I don't really know how I'm going to go about that. But I feel like I might take a break from this little section of the lore. Maybe go work on another part of it, something else, and then I could come back, have a bit of a fresh thought process for it. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this. Tell me what you think. Subscribe if you're a loser. You want to be a loser with me, you can subscribe. I don't know how to end these.